different from what Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent implied this morning when he said the Trump administration was open to negotiating to reduce tariffs. Now, the markets rallied early on the chance the administration might actually deliver on trade deals, but then stocks finished the day's lowers as investors lost hope. The S&P 500 fell 1.6%. The NASDAQ dropped 2.2% after each had rallied more than 4% earlier in the day. It's the first time since 1978 the S&P had such a significant reversal in the same day. Former leader of the National Foreign Trade Council told reporters at a briefing, quote, "Once the dust settles, I think you're going to see companies looking at basically tariff arbitrage possibilities. Can we shift our supply chains to countries that have lower tariffs? So instead of paying 46% from Vietnam, if we can pay 26% in India, that's worth looking at." Paul Krugman is a Nobel Prize-winning economist, distinguished professor at the Kennedy Graduate Center, who's been writing all about this on his Substack, and he joins me now. Well, Paul, I don't know if people know that your Nobel is in new economic geography, new trade theory, but you made your name and contributions to trade theory. This is like, before you started writing for the New York Times, this is really your bailiwick. So let's just start with, like, as someone who's thought about this and written about this literally for decades, have you ever encountered anything quite like the exogenous shock to the global trading system that is Donald Trump's behavior the last week?
This is completely off the charts. I mean, we've now, if these tariffs go into effect, which it appears they will, we're going to be looking at a tariff rate that is higher than Smoot-Hawley, than the tariff in 1930. That's the infamous worst tariff in history. And trade is 3 times as large as a share of the economy as it was then. So this is the biggest trade shock, certainly in U.S. history, I think in world history. It's incredible.
Now, it's because of that I think, again, there's a rationale amongst folks in finance and Wall Street that he can't be serious and that this is leverage to get a deal. And again, I don't know if they're wrong, because I think at some point he might cut his losses or he might get sort of cowed out of it. But it does seem to me that he has a vision here of essentially putting a moat around the country, and that if that's your vision, there's no deal that Vietnam could make that would end up in a favorable outcome from his own perspective of why he's doing this.
Yeah, the thing that apparently Wall Street is having a really hard time wrapping its mind around is that there isn't going to be a deal because there's nothing for most of the other countries involved here to concede. You know, the European Union, we're going to have a deal, and the European Union will cut its tariff barriers. Well, the average tariff that the European Union puts on U.S. exports is about 1.7%. We came into this with virtually free trade with other advanced countries. So now he's putting tariffs. He's putting a 20% tariff on the EU's exports. What can the European Union do? They basically were as open to our stuff as we are to theirs, so there's no possibility for a deal. And all of the stories about how there's a strategy here involve basically retconning. The reality is Trump wants tariffs. And then people are making up stories about what the strategy, because he can't really just mean to shut off international trade, but all indications are that's what he wants to do.
One of the things that he's also been consistent about, in the same way he's been consistent about tariffs, and in some ways these are related, and they're related to some of the areas you've worked on over the years. Yeah. He's been consistent that the U.S. dollar's status as a reserve currency, which gives us enormous amounts of benefits, right? We can run huge deficits, and that gives us some big, there's lots of stuff, wiggle room it gives us. That status as a reserve currency means the dollar is too expensive, and if you get rid of that, maybe the dollar gets cheaper and you totally undo the whole current global financial system.
Well, I'm not sure that the dollar, I'm a little bit of a skeptic on that, but that's kind of secondary. It's clear that Trump doesn't want, he wants to make countries not accumulate dollars. And there's at least hints that we may have controls on foreign capital, on foreign investment in the U.S., attempt to even force countries that have accumulated short-term U.S. Bonds to turn them into long-term U.S. bonds, which is a default. And that will certainly, the fundamental thing is the United States has been an attractive place to invest. The reason the dollar is strong, and basically the reason we have a trade deficit, is that the United States has been an attractive place to invest. And Trump, well, he can end that. He can make us a really lousy investment destination. How this is supposed to be a good thing for the United States, I don't know. But it's insane. I mean, if you think about, and by the way, this is global. I mean, the U.S. Treasury bills are the fundamental collateral of the whole world financial system. And if you undermine that, then that wreaks havoc across the world.
It's sort of hard to get your arms around this. One thing that I was reading today in a few different corners is that prices are going to go up, right? So the tariffs are sales taxes that will be paid largely by the consumer, not entirely. But one thing that a number of people cited in different industries is you're just going to have shortages. You're just going to have products not coming in. It's not necessarily even that they'll get more expensive, but a lot of stuff just won't be available.
Well, yeah, there's a particular thing that I don't think people have thought about enough. I mean, some of us have, but there's just different tariff rates on every country, a huge array of tariff rates, and lots of questions. You know, if something is from Ireland, European Union, is trucked across the border to Northern Ireland, which is Britain, which has a much lower tariff, is that a European? Anyway, to enforce these tariffs would require a huge administrative infrastructure, customs agents that we don't have, would require 10 times as many customs officials as we have. So do we have just cargo stacked up while we wait for these guys to throw up to create the infrastructure to enforce their policy? I'm pretty sure that the Trump people didn't think about that. And so we may just have stuff not, trade shutting down, not even because of the tariffs, but because we don't have the people to enforce the new rules.
It's really a fantastic point I hadn't thought of. Plus, a lot of incentives for smuggling, which is also probably not a great thing. And we've seen this, of course, in other situations, particularly when you're thinking about all of a sudden now there's reasons to smuggle softwood lumber across the Canadian border where there wasn't before. Like, that doesn't seem like that's going to be great either.
Yeah, and by the way, that was 34% tariff on Canadian softwood lumber, industry of the future, creating wooden planks. And this stuff. I guess to some extent people can be forgiven for assuming that this can't be real, that this must be just a ploy. But it's about to happen.
Paul Krugman, thank you very much for sharing your insight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
President Donald Trump welcomed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the White House Monday, where Trump repeated his call to permanently expel Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. Speaking to reporters from the Oval Office alongside Netanyahu, Vice President J.D. Vance and top cabinet officials, Trump called Gaza, quote, an incredible piece of important real estate that he wants the U.S. to own and control.
Well, you know how I feel about the Gaza Strip. I think it's an incredible piece of important real estate, and I think it's something that we would be involved in, but having a peace force like the United States there controlling and owning the Gaza Strip would be a good thing, because right now all it is for years and years, all I hear about is killing and Hamas and problems. And if you take the people, the Palestinians, and move them around to different countries, and you have plenty of countries that will do that, and you really have a freedom zone.
It was Netanyahu's second visit to the White House since Trump's inauguration, coming despite an international criminal court warrant seeking his arrest for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Gaza. During the meeting, Trump said the U.S. will hold direct talks with Iran on its nuclear program in Oman this weekend. Trump, who's repeatedly threatened to bomb Iran, said if the talks don't go well, quote, Iran's going to be in great danger, unquote. In Gaza, Palestinian journalist Ahmed Mansour has died a day after suffering severe burns from an Israeli strike on a tent housing reporters in Khan Yunis. Mansour was one of 3 people killed in the attack, which also killed a journalist with Palestine Today. Gaza's government media office reports Israeli attacks on Gaza since October 2023 have killed at least 211 Palestinian journalists. Israeli forces have killed at least 58 Palestinians in Gaza over the past 24 hours, with several children among the dead. The United Nations warns Israeli attacks on Gaza are now killing or injuring 100 children a day. This is Ghada Dabawek, a 6-year-old girl who lost her arm with an Israeli strike last week.
I was playing at school. I was playing on the swing. I was bombed. My arm, I got injured here on my arm. My arm was amputated.
The Palestine Red Crescent Society is demanding an independent investigation into the killing of 15 Palestinian medics and rescue workers in Gaza by Israel's military March 23rd. Victims of the attack near Rafah were discovered buried in a mass grave with their vehicles, ambulances, and a fire truck buried nearby. A Red Crescent spokesperson called the attack a, quote, full-fledged war crime.
We need justice for the victims, and we need to ensure that all of those who are responsible are held to account. Without this, the crimes will continue to happen. Without this, the systematic targeting for humanitarians, aid workers, and medics will continue to happen.
Nabal Farsakh is with the Palestine Red Crescent Society. Protests against Israel's U.S.-backed war on Gaza are continuing. Here in New York, Palestinian rights demonstrators descended on Grand Central Station Monday. Elsewhere, protesters gathered in front of the UN headquarters to demand the protection of mothers and pregnant women in Gaza as UN officials held an event on maternal and newborn health for World Health Day. Separately, the group Taxpayers Against Genocide delivered a report to the UN Human Rights Council Monday exposing U.S. complicity in systemic injustice and human rights violations against Palestinians. Meanwhile, at Princeton University, students protested an event featuring former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. This is 21-year-old Princeton student Emmanuel Sippi, the daughter of a rabbi and president of Princeton Alliance of Jewish Progressives.
Bennett has enabled violence at the highest levels of government and public life that attempt to justify violence that cannot be justified, killing that cannot be fathomed. His presence on our campus is a desecration of God's name. To his enabling of apartheid, genocide, and annexation, Jews at Princeton say, not in our name.
Microsoft has fired 2 workers who protested the company's ties to Israel's assault on Gaza at its 50th anniversary celebration Friday. Microsoft supplies the Israeli military with AI and cloud technology. This is software engineer Ibtihal Abusad, who organizes with the Microsoft employee-led campaign No Azure for Apartheid, confronting Microsoft AI CEO Mustafa Suleyman.
So the question I wanted to address today is really simple. What does all this mean?
Mustafa, shame on you. You say you claim that you care about using AI for good, but Microsoft sells AI weapons to the Israeli military. 50,000 people have died, and Microsoft powers this genocide in our region.
Thank you for your protest. I hear you.
You're serious. Tell me know about this, Mustafa.
I hear your protest. Thank you.
Shame on you. You are a war profiteer.
I hear you.
Stop using AI for genocide, Mustafa.
Last week, the BDS, that's Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions National Committee, announced Microsoft as a priority target and called on consumers to boycott its gaming subscriptions and products like Xbox. In more tech news, an Al Jazeera investigation finds Facebook hosted over 100 paid advertisements promoting illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank. The ads approved by Meta were calls for the demolition of Palestinian homes, schools, and playgrounds, and fundraising appeals for the Israeli military. The U.S. Supreme Court Monday gave the Trump administration the green light to use the 18th century Wartime Alien Enemies Act to expel Venezuelan immigrants and asylum seekers, but said that any target for removal must have the right to a court hearing. Last month, the Trump administration sent 3 planes with 238 Venezuelans to El Salvador in defiance of a judge's order. They were then transferred to a maximum security mega prison. On Monday, Chief Justice John Roberts also temporarily stayed a lower court's ruling, which ordered the Trump administration to bring back a Salvadoran father to his home in Maryland after he was wrongfully sent to the Salvadoran mega prison despite having protected status. Later in the broadcast, we'll get an update on the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who the Trump administration claims is unable to bring back to the United States, even though the Trump administration is paying $6 million to imprison asylum seekers and immigrants at the El Salvador prison. Meanwhile, the loved ones of Andrea Hernandez Romero, a gay Venezuelan asylum seeker who was also expelled to El Salvador, say they fear for Romero's safety at the notorious Secat mega prison. Romero appears to have been removed because he has tattoos of crowns, one on each forearm with the words Mom and Dad. Experts say tattoos are not an identifier of membership in the Tren de Aragua gang, as immigration officials falsely claim. He comes from a community in Venezuela where they celebrate Three Kings Day. In more immigration news, a mother and her 3 children have been released from a Texas detention center nearly 2 weeks after they were taken by Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents in a raid at a dairy production facility near the town of Sackett's Harbor in upstate New York. The raid happened not far from the home of Trump's so-called border czar, Tom Homan, where advocates held protests demanding the family's release. At the time of the raid, witnesses said a group of at least 7 people, including the family, were handcuffed before being removed from a home at the dairy farm and put in a van. The 3 children were enrolled in public school, one of them in the 3rd grade, the other 2 in 10th and 11th grade. The Dominican Republic is enacting a fresh series of border restrictions targeting asylum seekers from Haiti as thousands continue to flee amid political instability and a worsening humanitarian crisis. On Sunday, the Dominican president, Luis Abinader, moved to deploy hundreds of additional soldiers and ordered stepped-up surveillance along the Haitian border. He's also vowed to expedite the construction of a border wall. Dominican authorities have been repeatedly accused of widespread violence and human rights abuses against Haitians. This all comes as humanitarian groups continue to raise alarm over spiraling violence in Haiti, with more than 260 people killed during the recent gang attacks on 2 communities in Port-au-Prince, according to a UN report published Monday. The report details concerns with Haitian authorities and Kenyan armed forces that were deployed to Haiti, which on one occasion took at least 5 hours to respond to a gang attack. Haitians have repeatedly taken to the streets to protest the government's failure to address the security crisis, as armed gangs have now seized some 85% of the capital. President Trump has threatened to increase U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods by an additional 50% unless Beijing rescinds retaliatory tariffs imposed on U.S. goods. Trump said the new tariffs would take effect on Wednesday, raising the U.S. tariff on Chinese goods to 104%. In response, China's Commerce Ministry promised to fight Trump's tariffs to the end. After headlines, we'll look at how auto workers in the U.S. and Mexico are responding to Trump's trade war. A federal appeals court has overturned the Trump administration's firing of 2 top federal labor officials, ordering they be restored to their positions. Trump abruptly fired National Labor Relations Board member Gwynne Wilcox in January. Kathy Harris, who led the Merit Systems Protections Board, a judicial body that oversees protections for federal workers, was ousted weeks later. Federal law says that NLRB and MSPB members can only be fired for neglect or malfeasance. Trump officials are expected to ignore the latest ruling, likely taking the legal fight to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 2021, Wilcox became the first Black woman on the NLRB after being confirmed by the Senate following her nomination by President Biden. And a fired Justice Department lawyers accusing her former employer of intimidation tactics after the department planned to send armed U.S. Marshals to deliver a letter warning her against testifying to Congress about what she's called the ongoing corruption of the Trump administration. Liz Oyer told lawmakers Monday the Marshals ultimately called off their plans to visit her home after she confirmed also receiving the warning letter via email. Oyer spent 10 years as a federal public defender before then-President Biden appointed her to serve as pardon attorney 3 years ago. She was testifying to a joint hearing convened by Democrats on the House and Senate Judiciary Committees.
The letter was a warning to me about the risks of testifying here today. but I am here because I will not be bullied into concealing the ongoing corruption and abuse of power at the Department of Justice. DOJ is entrusted with keeping us safe, upholding the rule of law, and protecting our civil rights. It is not a personal favor bank for the president.
And those are some of the headlines. This
Happening, my weekly podcast, is now going to be available on YouTube. It debuted today. We're very, very excited for my first guest in this new era where you can watch the show as well as listen. I talked to the always awesome Ezra Klein, who's been a friend of mine for 20 years, about his new book with Derek Thompson called Abundance. And we discussed the need to reorient some of the old political arguments to new realities and about how we got to our current state of Trump-declared emergency.
This is why Mitch McConnell gave us Trump in many ways, I think. Because to the extent you break the legislative body's ability to produce outcomes, the extent you sort of mire down processes and they become ineffectual and people lose trust in them, they don't like them, then it's like, well, let's do the emergency thing. Let's do the strongman thing. It just becomes more and more tempting.
And this gets to something that is a genuine trade-off and a very reasonable argument, which is, well, look, aren't you happy you have all these protections, which aren't working that well, but still, now, right? Kristen Sinema going around, retweeting everybody who wants to filibuster anything Donald Trump does. Well, aren't you glad you kept the filibuster now? Right. Aren't you glad you have adversarial legalism now that you're turning to the courts to stop Donald Trump? Aren't you glad you had all these things now? And one thing is, they're not working. It turns out a lot of things we treated as rules or laws were norms.
Right.
And the administration get away with destroying them. And I would say the much more dangerous version of the Trump administration is the one that is procedurally arsonistic in the way it currently is, but was macroeconomically competent, right? If they were not using executive authority to lay down insane tariffs that was sending the stock market into turmoil, this would be much more dangerous. But you can't always assume that your strongmen are going to have an insane view of global trade, right? Like that's not, or even that they will maintain an insane view of global trade if the pain gets too big. So I do want to note that.
It's I thought, fascinating discussion about how not just to restart progress, but sort of traditional structures and ways of thinking may be holding us back as we think about what's next. Again, this is the first time that you can watch the entire discussion on YouTube. Just search WithPod on YouTube or go to msnbc.com/WithPod to watch the full video. If you're still just an audio person, don't you worry. You can always just listen to us as usual, wherever you get your
also measure biomarkers that can help them prevent the disease or at least perhaps prevent its onset. Joining me with more, CNN's chief medical correspondent, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who's one of the participants in this unique study. There's very little good news about Alzheimer's. This sounds like good news. Talk about what's so significant about these results.
Yeah, I mean, look, for a decade and a half, there was no good news at all. Then over the last few years, now a couple, 3 years, there's been increasing good news. I think the big thing about this is that diagnosing Alzheimer's, diagnosing dementia, you couldn't even do that until someone had an autopsy, which was very grim. Then they found that you could use certain biomarkers to basically determine whether or not you had a significant amount of plaque in your brain. We've known that for a while. What this study has shown is you can now follow those biomarker levels and figure out if the lifestyle interventions that you're making, hopefully things to improve your brain, are actually making a difference. They're actually decreasing the amount of proteins, these plaques in your brain. So, we used to be able to diagnose it this way, but being able to follow it along this way, it's more like a cholesterol test.
What does the blood test measure?
So there's two major proteins. There's lots of biomarkers, but two major proteins, amyloid and tau. And we've known that for some time. But to actually be able to measure those as a biomarker through a simple blood test is something that's relatively new.
As opposed to having to get like a CAT scan or a spinal tap.
A spinal tap or an MRI or a PET scan or something like that. So these are really good. There's one that's called p-tau 217. You don't need to remember the name, but it's highly correlated with getting a PET scan or even doing a spinal tap and measuring that in the spinal fluid.
And in this study, which is by this guy Richard Isaacson, who's a neurologist, works out of Florida, they're actually looking at like 125 biomarkers.
Yeah, they're looking at all sorts of different biomarkers because they think that this can get highly personalized. Again, we've been treating this in a very sort of either you have it or you don't sort of way. Now we know you can follow the biomarkers, and now we know there's certain biomarkers that may be higher in you versus me, and being able to follow those. So I went through a lot of the cognitive testing that's part of this, which I got to say is pretty intense. I mean, you know, how many words can you name starting with the letter G in the next 60 seconds?
I don't even want to.
Right, stuff like that. Or how many animals?
Right.
The more complicated the animal, the better. My point is that the cognitive testing is quite good. I went through the study. I implemented some of the lifestyle changes.
So Richard Isaacson and his team look at your biomarkers and then decide, okay, well, this medication would be good for you. This lifestyle change would be good for you. What were some of the lifestyle changes?
It was all lifestyle changes for me. There was no new medications that were recommended. There were a couple of supplements for vitamin B, for example, but a couple of interesting ones. So first of all,
Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a guy who has downplayed this disease and spread dangerous misinformation about the vaccine that prevents it, went to the funeral of the latest victim, 8-year-old Daisy Hildebrand. He met her family and the family of the other child who died. Then in a social media post about his meeting with these families, RFK Jr. praised two of the doctors in Texas who have been the most prominent voices of, quote, alternative treatments. That is the Secretary of Health and Human Services out there touting alternative treatments instead of vaccinations, though he did mention those as well, which are literally the most effective way to stop the spread of measles. Javier Becerra served as the Secretary of Health and Human Services under President Biden. He's now running to be governor of California, and he joins me now. You know, there tends to be a fair amount of continuity between administrations at agencies like CDC or FDA. And there's different policy priorities. It's not like they're totally the same. But in terms of dealing with a measles outbreak, I feel like it formerly would have been fair to say there wasn't like a Republican or Democratic way to do that. It feels like now there is, but maybe I'm misreading it. Like, do you feel like you're seeing something that represents a break, a disjuncture from previously?
Chris, I'd probably qualify it as different from a partisan fissure. I'd say this is a scientific earthquake where what we see is that the science that has saved lives, whether it's with measles or with COVID, is now being questioned, but questioned by people at the very top of the most important health agency, quite honestly, in the world, because what we do in America ripples throughout the world. And so to have someone who confuses Americans about the life-saving treatments that can keep your children alive by mixing that with messages about people who've given different messages about vaccines, it makes it difficult to believe that science is really leading the way at the Department of Health and Human Services.
Along with the management of this measles outbreak, which at first he downplayed, is now the largest in quite a while, it seems very clear we're undercounting the amount of cases. Well, let me stay on that for a second. How worried are you about where this goes?
Well, my understanding is that right now in Texas, and I think they've hit or surpassed 500 cases, that Texas by itself has had twice as many cases so far in these 4 months, less than 4 months of 2025, than the entire United States had in all of 2024. 2 kids have died. People who are unvaccinated are going to hospitals. How bad is it? Well, I mean, I have 3 daughters. I certainly don't want to see one of my kids die. And yet today there are 2 kids who, but for what's going on in America, might still be alive.
Alongside the kind of dismantling of the architecture around vaccines at CDC, we've seen a wholesale assault on American health and scientific and biomedical research. I think it's almost impossible, and I've struggled with this personally, to articulate the scope of it because it is so profound. But as someone who worked at HHS, how would you describe to someone who isn't really paying attention to the 10,000 people laid off and what's being done at FDA and NIH, like what is being done to America's health research and scientific basis?
Yeah, quick story. I remember early on during COVID, the First Lady, Dr. Biden, and I went to Navajo country in Arizona to visit with families there to encourage them to go now and get their cancer screenings. Because during COVID, when everything was shutting down, there were probably 9 to 10 million Americans who didn't go in to their clinic or see their doctor to get their cancer screenings. And the way we fight cancer the most effectively is by getting people screened so we catch it early instead of in the later stages. So we went out there and we were aggressive because we wanted people to know, hey, COVID is bad and you got to be careful, but you still got to go get screened for cancer. Today, it sounds like we've got a federal government that is not on top of it, that is not trying to stay ahead of the measles, ahead of avian flu, ahead of whatever might be coming our way that we know how to take care of. And that is dangerous because HHS is a place of brilliance. You've got some of the best scientists who've given up real big money to come work at HHS, whether CDC, National Institutes of Health, FDA, and now they're being shackled or they're being fired. And it's crazy to see this because you don't replace top professionals like that very easily because it's tough to get them to you.
Javier Becerra, who served as HHS secretary, is running for governor in California now. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That is All In on this Tuesday night. The Rachel Maddow Show starts right now. Good evening, Rachel.
Good evening, Chris. Thank you, my friend. Much appreciated.
You bet.
And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Happy to have you here. Quick thing right off the bat. I have a book out, my most recent book called Prequel, came out last year. You might have heard about it. Even if you didn't, here's the news. Here's why I'm mentioning it. My book Prequel is coming out in paperback next month on May 6th. And the reason I'm telling you this now is that I'm going to be doing a little bit of traveling around the country, doing live events, live talks to support the book coming out. It's not like a big book tour, but it's just a little one. But just in case you have any interest in seeing me in person at one of these events, where the real attraction is meeting other people who are interested in seeing me in person. Here's 3 dates that I can tell you about tonight where we are putting tickets on sale right now. Thursday, May 8th, Miami, Florida. Friday, May 9th, Long Island in New York. And Saturday, May 31st in St. Louis, Missouri. So if you'd like tickets to go to one of those events, you can get them at msnbc.com/prequel, which is the name of the book. Or you can just open up the camera function on your phone, hold your phone up to that weird little blob thing that's on the screen right now, and it will give you a link to click to go right there. So I just wanted to get that out of the way right off the bat. I will let you know when we've got some more dates. If we have more dates, I think we're going to have a few more dates. But that's it for now. Okay, let's get going. You have heard of this person named Kash Patel, right? Do you remember Kash Patel? He was like a cartoon figure from the first Donald Trump term. He made himself cash branded merchandise where the S in cash is a $sign. Get it? He sold cash branded wine. He sold a magic elixir that he said would reverse your vaccination status if by some sad turn of events you'd had the COVID vaccine. He could reverse it for you. He sold something called Coin, but with a G. Coin? C-O-I-G-N. He called it a credit card for conservatives because, you know, conservatives can't use regular credit cards. He did podcasts for a conspiracy theorist media company controlled by the Chinese Falun Gong religious movement. He also famously sold a whole line of children's books about the glory of King Donald, which means exactly what you think it does. And so naturally, Donald Trump looked at that list of qualifications and decided that that man is the right choice to be director of the FBI. And at that job, Kash Patel quickly distinguished himself, very quickly. Very, very quickly. Upon reporting for the job, Mr. Patel made clear his immediate priorities. Quoting from the Wall Street Journal, quote, Patel told officials he planned to spend a lot of time in Las Vegas, where he was living last year. He ordered new decor for his Washington office at the FBI headquarters and asked for his personal trainer to be cleared to enter the headquarters building for his workouts. That same Wall Street Journal story about Kash Patel's first days on the job at the FBI also included the fact that Mr. Patel, quote, broke a promise he made to agents that he would appoint a deputy director of the FBI from among their ranks. So here's this, like, podcaster tent revival guy, right? With the merchandise branded with his name and the bottles of snake oil that he'll sell you and the children's books about Donald Trump being a king. That is who Donald Trump puts in charge of the FBI. When he gets there, he tells the agents of the FBI, essentially, hey, listen, don't worry, I know I'm an outsider, but I respect what you do enough that we're going to pick one of you guys, an experienced FBI agent, to be my deputy in running this place. Sure, maybe I'm just a podcaster, but we'll put somebody in here as my number two who you'll really trust. And then does he do that? No, he does not. He hires instead, as the deputy director of the FBI, another podcaster. This burly man, whose whole kind of brand as a podcaster is that he's kind of burly. His whole shtick is man in tight t-shirt, talks about fighting a lot, and makes a lot of melodrama about the importance of physical toughness and being willing to die heroically for the cause. And of course, the cause is the greatness and infallibility of Donald Trump. Wow, does he love that guy? But he means it only in the manliest way possible. Look at these arms. It's like his whole shtick. So Kash Patel, podcaster, names this other podcaster guy to be deputy director of the FBI, instead of actually hiring anyone with FBI experience. But now that deputy director, he too has started on the job. And how is that going so far? Headline, FBI creates multi-agent bodyguard team to protect Dan Bongino. The former pro-Trump podcaster is the first deputy director to have a security detail. Full-time protection could require up to 20 agents, former officials said. Quote, in a break from past practice, in which the Bureau's number two officials have not had security details, the FBI has now issued a call for agents to serve as bodyguards for Deputy Director Dan Bongino. The FBI canvass sought agents willing to relocate for 30 days of temporary duty to protect Dan Bongino 24 hours a day. Full-time protection could require as many as 20 agents. The previous deputy director was assigned a single agent part-time to accompany him to certain events. He had a full detail only when he traveled overseas. In contrast, though, now, two former FBI officials familiar with the matter said Dan Bongino's current bodyguards have followed him inside secure FBI facilities, including headquarters in Washington. They said directors typically walk around FBI headquarters without their security details. But not this deputy director, not this podcaster. He wants the full 24 hours, 20-man team surrounding him at all times, including while he's walking around inside the FBI building. Because, what? Like spiders? Creaking sounds? Is there any chance you just hate to be alone? I mean, we are in this everything must go moment, right? In this administration, we can no longer fund libraries or museums. We must stop our work on multi-drug-resistant tuberculosis and drug-resistant gonorrhea. We are closing the Head Start offices. We are firing the meteorologists who produce weather forecasts. We are firing the people who answer the phones at the Social Security office. We are firing tens of thousands of people who work with veterans at the VA. We are shutting the U.S. Department of Education because everything must go. It's all waste. It's all waste. It all has to go because we, the taxpayers, must pay for Kash Patel's new drapes in his office, his nice new decor that he demanded on day one, and also the cost of him, what was that phrase, of him spending, what was the quote? Quote, a lot of time in Las Vegas, where he won't even be enjoying the new drapes. Also, we have to pay for his deputy director, Dan Bongino, the podcaster with the arms. We'll be paying for him to be surrounded at all times by a full-time phalanx of a 20-man team of bodyguards who stay with him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So, like, while he sleeps, they can sit and watch him. And while he's inside the FBI headquarters building at work, inside, they will be there surrounding him in case, like, he has to get up and go potty or something. There is a team that can take him. But it's not only Trump's guys at the FBI. Headline, the cabinet secretary who wants his cookies freshly baked. Trump administration Interior Secretary Doug Burgum likes chocolate chip cookies, preferably freshly baked and still warm. This peculiar fact became the talk of the Department of the Interior in recent weeks after his chief of staff made an unusual request of staff in his office. Quote, learn to regularly bake cookies for Secretary Burgum and his guests using the industrial ovens at the department headquarters. That request was not the only move by his team that has alarmed some Interior officials. 4 people familiar with Burgum's leadership told The Atlantic that those who run Burgum's office have repeatedly made unusual demands to his employees. His office leadership, for example, once instructed political appointees to act as servers for a multi-course meal. They also did, like waiters, they made them into waiters. They also dispatched a U.S. Park Police helicopter for his personal transportation. On at least one occasion, a political appointee was told to remake the cookies because the batch was subpar, according to 3 people. The Atlantic has 3 sources on the Interior Department staff member being told to rebake the cookies for the secretary. What did they do with the old cookies? What was wrong with them? Is there anything you could do to cookies that would be that bad? Now, there are sources from the Department of Interior that are defending Secretary Burgum here, noting explicitly in their pushback to The Atlantic that staff members are not required to make this cookie dough themselves. It is store-bought cookie dough that they only need to bake. So ease up, people. Quote, Burgum has also used the political appointees in his department for another purpose in recent days, stacking firewood in his office's fireplace. Burgum also reportedly demands, quote, that any labels get removed from water bottles before they are delivered to him. Or else. I mean, the man obviously cannot remove the labels from his own water bottles. That must be done by other government employees, people on the payroll paid by the taxpayers, because I mean, think about it. Honestly, if the secretary himself was occupied removing his own water bottle labels, he might not get to the cookies in time. And then who would send them back, demanding that they were not warm enough and they must be rebaked? The secretary is in charge of some really specific stuff. Tell me more about your Department of Government Efficiency. I mean, at the National Park Service, they're firing the rangers and the maintenance crews and scientists by the thousands. But Park Service helicopters, including the staff that fly them and maintain them, they're being diverted to pop Secretary warm cookies around town when he's in a rush. You know, honestly, it's so much nicer than sitting in traffic. Quote, the aviation unit of the U.S. Park Police, a division of the Department of the Interior, does not routinely handle VIP transport, according to a U.S. Park Police fact sheet. The blue and white helicopters launched to provide additional aerial surveillance during presidential and other dignitary movements and are used for medevac, search and rescue, high-risk prisoner transport, and to support law enforcement operations. And also to make sure he is there in time for the cookies to still be warm, or they are going back. Do it again! Doug Burgum used to be the governor of North Dakota. In his very red state, there were protests all over this weekend. Nearly 1,000 people showed up in Fargo, North Dakota. That's not far from where Doug Burgum is from. But tons of people also turned out in Bismarck, North Dakota, and Devil's Lake, North Dakota, and in Grand Forks. Minot, North Dakota actually had a really, really big turnout. And look at this. This was from little Jamestown, North Dakota. When I first saw this, I was like, oh, look, there's like 5 people down by the Dairy Queen. But no, that's just who was early. The footage keeps going, and then you realize, oh, look, the whole town's coming. The whole town's coming down, marching down to join them. Those other people were just staking out the spot. We tried here on this show last night to show a snapshot of all the huge protests that happened this weekend. We really only got to a tiny slice of them. There were so many protests in so many places. I mean, the millions of people protested this weekend. And we heard from you guys about it in response to last night's show. Hey, you should have made a bigger deal about what happened in my town. You should have shown how big it was in Las Vegas. Yes, absolutely. Also, you know, Richmond, Virginia was really, really impressive. And a ton of people turned out in Bozeman, Montana. And in Knoxville, Tennessee, there was a ton of people. And in Galveston, Texas, people were out and people were in a very good mood. I mean, we didn't even try to show the protests across the border, the protests at cities abroad and at U.S. embassies, like the one in Ottawa, where tons of people turned out. There were literally millions of people who turned out this weekend in person to protest against Trump and what he's doing, and it is hard to show it all. But you know what really surprised me? It shouldn't have. I've been doing this enough weeks now that this shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. What surprised me is that after we saw millions of people turn out on Monday, it just kept going. As soon as the hands-off protests finished up on Saturday, it kept going.
Protesters gathered outside the Social Security office in Mount Lebanon, continuing protests against the Trump administration. Several different groups coming together to hold this rally, fighting against the Department of Government Efficiency's effort to slash funding for the program and showing support for people who work inside the building.
They call it an entitlement, but most people who get Social Security have been paying in their whole lives. You plan on it when you're older, and then for that to be under threat now is, you know, unconscionable.
This follows the large, widespread hands-off protests across the country over the weekend, including thousands gathering in downtown Pittsburgh on Saturday.
Yeah, thousands and thousands of people gathered at a whole bunch of different hands-off protests on Saturday, including in Pennsylvania. But as of Monday, that was Mount Lebanon in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. People are just still going. This was another protest for Social Security in Niles, Michigan yesterday. This last night was Youngstown, Ohio, in a Republican district where the Republican Congressman Michael Rulli has refused all year to hold a town hall with his constituents. Last night, well, 2,800 people turned out for a single town hall event with Democratic Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Their Republican congressman won't do it. A Democrat nearby will. On the other side of the number line, in terms of the number of people turning out, but maybe just as impressive, were these folks who scrambled and turned out on less than an hour's notice yesterday when they found out that Trump Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was coming to the University of Utah in Salt Lake City to do a freaking anti-fluoride event. You see, people turned out on no notice. This was not planned in advance. They just heard he was coming and they scrambled. Got polio? Me neither. Thanks, science. Vaccines save lives. Make America scientific again. This was, again, not pre-planned. They just scrambled when they heard he was coming to make sure that somebody was there to show up and to say no. This was today at the U.S. Senate office building in Washington, D.C., fired federal workers going from office to office, telling U.S. senators of both parties about their jobs and their work and what the American people are losing thanks to Trump's mass indiscriminate firings of federal workers. This was Detroit today. People turning out in the cold in Detroit. Vaccinate yourself against dictatorship. Kill the cut. Save science. Cut DOGE, not funding. And, you know, we see the direct line between pushback and the result is sometimes a dotted line. Sometimes you got to follow it out in time. But if you look, you see it working in ways large and small every day, everywhere. Tonight, we got a federal judge in Washington, D.C., ordering President Trump to stop his punishment of the Associated Press. This is from the ruling tonight, quote, "The AP seeks restored eligibility for admission to the press pool and limited access press events, untainted by an impermissible viewpoint-based exclusion. That is what the court orders today, for the government to put the AP on an equal playing field as similarly situated outlets, despite the AP's use of disfavored terminology." The court declares that the AP's exclusion has been contrary to the First Amendment, and it enjoins the government from continuing down that unlawful path. For these reasons, it is ordered that defendants shall immediately rescind the denial of AP's access to the Oval Office, Air Force One, and other limited spaces based on AP's viewpoint, when such spaces are made open to other members of the White House press pool. It is ordered that defendants shall immediately rescind their viewpoint-based denial of the AP's access to events open to all credentialed White House journalists. That ruling tonight in federal court in Washington, D.C. Also today, the Trump administration put back up the website for the Underground Railroad and Harriet Tubman. The Washington Post reported on Sunday that that website had been taken down by Trump and replaced with a bizarre Orwellian Trump-think version of that history, which didn't mention slavery or African Americans or the fact that it specifically was African Americans who were enslaved. Headline in the Washington Post after that coverage Sunday. Here's the headline today. National Park Service restores Underground Railroad webpage after outcry. We even today had news that Trump's truly inexplicable, even bizarre cuts at a refuge for Florida manatees. That has now been reversed. Trump fired the rangers at this manatee refuge, but now, quote, after public outcry and 2 court orders, the rangers are back on the job. This is such a stupid way to run a government, right? Random individual disasters manage somehow to get enough attention to often get protested, and then the Trump people find they can't really defend them, and so those things then get partially restored or maybe not really restored, but they say they'll fix them, and they hope people stop complaining. But meanwhile, while people are scrambling to try to fix that mistake they made, these guys are destroying 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000 other things all the time. It is a terrible, absolutely ridiculous way to run a government, especially under the name of efficiency, right? I mean, how can it be that the reason we still have people on the job today storing and transporting our nuclear weapons is not because Donald Trump didn't fire them, because he did, but only because, just our luck, the right people found out that he had fired them and made a big enough ruckus about it in time so some of them could be hired back. That is the reason we now have people on the job, keeping our nuclear weapons from prematurely exploding. That's the system now. That's how we're running it. And it's incredibly stupid. But the big, 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 big problem with that being our system right now is that for some problems, the people who are most affected and most hurt by it are the people who can least make a ruckus. The people who have the least opportunity to see what's wrong, complain about it in a way that is big enough that it's going to get noticed and their complaints are going to be taken seriously. And so somebody's going to do something about it and maybe it'll get reversed. The people who are going to be hurt the most grievously are the people who are least capable of raising a ruckus about what's being done to them. And so here we are. Headline, Washington Post. Social Security website keeps crashing as DOJ demands cuts to IT staff. Retirees and disabled people are facing chronic website outages and other access problems as they attempt to log into their online Social Security accounts. The website has crashed repeatedly in recent weeks, with outages lasting anywhere from 20 minutes to almost a day. Even when the site is back online, many customers have not been able to sign into their accounts or have logged in only to find information missing. The disruptions are occurring as Trump's acting Social Security chief and the DOJ team move to lay off large swaths of the workforce. Thousands of Social Security employees have already been pushed out, many in customer-facing roles, others with expertise in the agency's technology systems. The network outages are one in a cascade of blows to customer service that also have hobbled phone systems and field office operations as the workforce shrinks. The network crashes specifically appear to be caused by an expansion initiated by the Trump team. The Trump technology staff did not test the software against a high volume of users to see if the servers could handle a rush. Connectivity issues and bugs with the expanded system have caused the portal that manages logins and authentication for many Social Security applications to go down. That's the Washington Post. Here's the headline in the New York Times, quote, "Just a mess. Staff cuts, rushed changes, and anxiety at Social Security." President Trump promised not to touch Social Security, but as Elon Musk's team trims staff and plans trims, that's doing a lot of work there, trims staff and plans cuts to phone services, the system is groaning under the pressure. And here's the lead. Quote, the line started forming outside the Social Security office in suburban Glendale, Arizona, not long after sunrise. Dozens of retirees and people with disabilities shuffling papers, some leaning on walkers, all anxious to know whether Trump's government overhaul had put their safety nets at risk. When 9 a.m. came, an employee emerged from the building with flyers, asking the crowd to come back once they had scheduled an appointment. One woman yelled, "I've called for days." Another said, "We came from a long ways away." Still another let everyone know they had been handed a load of bunk, though she used a more colorful term. Quote, on April 14th, the Social Security Agency plans to largely phase out phone services for people filing for retirement and survivor benefits or changing their direct deposit information, forcing them to file online or come into the office. Staffing levels at the Social Security Administration were already at 50-year lows, and the departure of so many workers who answered phones and worked field office counters has led to longer lines and phone waits. Teresa Boswell, whose vote for Mr. Trump in November helped flip Arizona, but who found herself fuming outside the Social Security office in Glendale last week, unable to sign up for $1,200 in monthly benefits after she retired from her job processing legal papers, told The Times, quote, I didn't know he was going to pull this. She told The Times, quote, this is a joke. It's not a joke. It's the destruction of one of the core moral and practical functions of the United States government that affects elderly and disabled people who are among the least able to raise a relevant ruckus when things go wrong that hurt them grievously. And the Trump administration's approach to handling this crisis is to just hope that people don't hear about it. From the New York Times, quote, the White House has grown worried enough about the political fallout from the long lines and wait times that White House officials are pressuring Social Security administrators to reduce the information that they put online, which could draw attention to problems. Yeah, we wouldn't want to draw any attention to these problems. Tonight, we are going to speak with the Attorney General of the state of Arizona. She's a Democrat. Her name is Chris Mays. And at least for the state of Arizona, her office has created a website. It's an easy-to-use, one-page website. I spent some time on it today. This is it. This is the whole page. This is what it looks like. It's very simple. And the reason they've put up this webpage is for people in Arizona, if they're having trouble with Social Security because of what Trump is doing to it, they can use this website to report it to her office, to report it to their own state attorney general's office. So number one, the Attorney General's office can document what the problems are. Number two, they can hopefully offer some help. And number three, you know what maybe is the most important thing here? They can, by doing this, implicitly tell older and disabled people and their families that they do not have to be alone in contending with this. Because who else is telling them that? We need, and we are now getting, a lot of pushback to what is going wrong in this country in the midst of this authoritarian takeover. We need, and we are getting, a lot of pushback. We also need help from good government. And Arizona's state government is trying to help here on this specific issue. I want to find out a lot more about it. Arizona's Attorney General Chris Mays joins us next.
Trump flags, starting fires, and then pointing at the peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters. You saw how peaceful they were at the Capitol building, smashing windows, you know, grabbing police officers. You know, that's not peaceful. Building a guillotine, like, that's not a peaceful thing. They had weapons around, you know. And listen, I'm for some of the pardons, because when Trump's always saying it wasn't his fault that the war in the Ukraine happened, as if we're supposed to forget the impeachment. because he was impeached and he withheld the defense funding. And when he withheld the defense funding for 6 months, Trump assembled troops along the border. So he says, oh, the war would have never happened. He was impeached for withholding defense funding. Well, that's what allowed Russia to encroach in the first place. Yeah, you could say, oh.
Arizona's Democratic State Attorney General Chris Mays has filed or joined, I think the number is a whole honking bunch of multi-state lawsuits against the Trump administration. Arizona has led or joined a lawsuit against Trump's attempt to end the part of the Constitution that says anyone born here is an American, a lawsuit against his federal funding freeze, a lawsuit against cuts to NIH research, a lawsuit against DOJ's attempts to access private treasury data, a lawsuit against the constitutionality of DOJ itself, a lawsuit against mass firings of federal workers, a lawsuit against cuts to Arizona schools, a lawsuit against cuts to public health grants, a lawsuit against Trump's weird attempt to take over state elections, a lawsuit against cuts to Arizona libraries and museums. There's probably more. In Arizona, they have been busy suing the bejesus out of Donald Trump for what he has been doing in this second disastrous term as president. Well, now, in addition to all of that, Arizona's Attorney General Chris Mays has just launched a new effort to combat what Trump is doing to gut and essentially disable the Social Security Administration. Attorney General Mays is now urging Arizona residents to report to her office any problems they are having accessing their Social Security benefits amid the Trump administration's efforts to gut that agency and what it provides. Her office has launched a new website where Arizonans can go to report any problems they are experiencing with Social Security. The website allows Arizonans to register whether they've had any problem receiving their Social Security check on time, or if they were unable to reach the Social Security Administration online or on the phone or in person at an office. It's a very simple website, but it gives people a place to report what they're going through. In announcing this new web portal, Attorney General Mays said this. She said, quote, "I'm highly concerned that Elon Musk and the Trump administration will take a wrecking ball to the Social Security Administration. We need any Arizonan who experiences any disruption to their hard-earned Social Security to report the issue immediately to my office. I refuse to let an authoritarian administration override the rule of law and destroy critical services that millions of Arizonans rely on." Joining us now is Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays. Attorney General Mays, I really appreciate you making time to be here this evening. Thank you.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
The reason I think this moves me, in addition to interests me, is that I feel like the people who are having such a hard time and have such anxiety and are so dependent on Social Security right now as they are taking a wrecking ball to it, I felt like very few people have been able to offer them anything in the way of concrete help or even somebody to listen to them in terms of what they're going through. What do you think your office is going to be able to do constructively with the information that you're able to collect from this website?
So, yeah, I mean, what we're hoping to do is, first of all, gather information and gather evidence about what is actually going on out there. And this is incredibly important for a state like Arizona, where 1.5 million Arizonans rely on Social Security. 1 out of every 5 Arizona residents rely on Social Security. And so this is incredibly important to gather this information. And I'll tell you what, we're getting some data back that is very, very alarming. We now know that more than 36 people have reported to us a disruption in their actual checks, in the checks that they're getting. So disruptions in checks. And then a number of other people, 30 or so, have told us that they're having trouble getting online, that when they call, they're being hung up on. They're trying to change their address, or they might be trying to change their direct deposit information, and the website is freezing up. And so, you know, this is very alarming. It is unacceptable. And it strikes me as possible evidence that Elon Musk and Doge and Donald Trump are trying to sabotage Social Security from inside.
Wow, that is very alarming. With that data in hand, I spent some time on the website today. I know you're asking people to give you contact information, address, to give you the basic checkbox in terms of what they're experiencing, and then there's a place where they can elaborate to explain more of what's going on. I can't imagine that your office has the capacity to individually help every person who's having trouble here. Is there any hope for essentially directing people to troubleshooting resources, or to having government agencies interact with Social Security in such a way that maybe these things can be fixed in a more wholesale way? I mean, this can be really desperate for people really quickly if they're not getting their checks.
Absolutely. And we're just starting to think about that in terms of our resources inside the AG's office. We do have a consumer section where we do this kind of outreach for folks who are reporting consumer complaints. I have investigators that can go out. I mean, I just saw your lead up talking about the folks outside the Glendale office. I think I'm going to send investigators out there to check out what's going on. But the other thing we can do is reach out to our congressional delegations and senators and ask them if they can have their folks work with these people. But look, at the end of the day, if this is really happening, and it's really starting to look like it is happening, we may very well be gathering evidence for a lawsuit against the administration on this. I mean, there is nothing, I think, more important in American life and for Americans than their Social Security checks. And this is money that Americans earned. It's their money. And if it's being stolen from them or deprived from them, even for a few days, for many people that can be catastrophic. It can mean that they're going to go without food, they could go without prescriptions, without medication. It could be a life or death situation. So in my mind, it was just incredibly important for us to give people a way to tell us whether this is happening.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, just from a moral perspective, looking in on this, it feels like the first concrete addressing of people who otherwise may not have any other means of communicating with people what they're up against when it could be a very dire situation. Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays, thank you for doing this. Thank you for helping us understand it. We'd love to check back in with you as you get more data, you hear from more Arizonans, and you get a clearer picture.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. I would also encourage other states. I know they're doing this in Arizona. I don't know if they're doing this in any other states, but I don't know at this point why every state isn't doing something like this, because elderly and disabled people need somewhere to go. They should, if we can't do it at the federal level, we should be doing it state by state. All right, more news ahead here tonight. Stay with
Wall Street. The Dow started the day in the green, but by the time markets closed, it fell more than 300 points. The Nasdaq is down 2%. The S&P 500 is down 1.5%. President Trump's broad reciprocal tariffs are set to go into effect Wednesday. The White House says dozens of nations have already reached out to negotiate a path forward, and the president says these talks will be unique for each country.
I call them tailored deals, not off the rack. These are tailored, highly tailored deals. Right now, Japan is flying here to make a deal. South Korea is flying here to make a deal, and others are flying here. We've had talks with many countries, over 70. They all want to come in.
Despite these talks, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer told a Senate committee Tuesday the administration is not planning on offering exemptions and doesn't want what he called a Swiss cheese solution. More on that later. China, the world's second largest economy, also said Tuesday it's willing to, quote, fight to the end amid a tariff back and forth with the U.S. President Trump is set to raise the tariff rate against China to 104% Wednesday after Beijing put an additional 34% tariff on U.S. products. This is on top of 10 to 15% tariffs that imposed on some U.S. agricultural goods and energy and farming equipment. CBS News.
Tariffs are kicking in, and Elon Musk is freaking out.
Go yourself. Is that clear?
That's the subject of today's video. Headline, Musk calls Navarro a moron as Trump tariff spat gets messy and basically...
Before
Before she was Donald Trump's Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem was the governor of South Dakota. And her time as South Dakota governor was a lot. There's so much to say. The flooding, the COVID, the daughter's real estate license, that poor dog, the poor goat. I mean, honestly, I could go on. I could go on. But one thing that you may or may not remember about her time as governor of South Dakota was the teeth thing. While she was serving as governor, Kristi Noem, sitting governor, posted on all her social media accounts a long, apparently professionally produced infomercial about her fantastic experience with a dentist in Texas. Nearly 5 minutes of the governor speaking straight to camera about this particular dentist and how great this dentist was, interspersed with many, many, many extreme close-ups of her Kristi Noem mouth. I mean, this is a weird thing for a governor to do, right? Governor Noem never disclosed if she was paid for this infomercial, or perhaps if maybe she got the dental work for free or at a discount in exchange for doing the infomercial. She never disclosed if anyone paid for her travel to Texas. But now we know. Now we know that someone did pay for that trip. It was South Dakota taxpayers. In newly released travel records, the AP found that the tens of thousands of dollars in travel expenses Kristi Noem billed to the state of South Dakota from when she was governor included $2,200 for a trip to Houston for her Instagram dental work showcase. And you know, that, of course, is a real slap in the face to South Dakota taxpayers. But in particular, I mean, spare a thought for South Dakota's dentists. Right? How must it feel to be a dental professional in the state of South Dakota and have your own governor bill you and your fellow citizens thousands of dollars so she can go get her teeth done in Texas? Because no one in South Dakota is good enough for her and her teeth. I mean, Kristi Noem is now Donald Trump's Secretary of Homeland Security. Here she is wearing what appears to be a bulletproof vest at a meeting in New York City. Here she is in full Customs and Border Patrol uniform costume on set at Fox News. She is not a Customs and Border Patrol agent, but she had to make her a uniform, I guess, including the hat. Here's another hat. Here's her in a cowboy hat, because why not? Here she is at the southern border on a horse, because sure, what's a cowboy hat without a horse a few feet below it? Here she was a couple of weeks ago, posing Abu Ghraib style in front of prisoners at El Salvador's brutal mega prison, where the Trump administration has locked up hundreds of people who were living in the United States. And now the new chapter from Kristi Noem is here she is doing armed ride-alongs with ICE agents, where she gets dressed up and she holds big guns and she play acts at helping personally to arrest people as the Secretary of Homeland Security. Again, comes with a hat. Our friends at the New York Post report today that Noem, on this recent ride-along, brought a friend. His name is Corey Lewandowski, a longtime Donald Trump ally and advisor. You can see Mr. Lewandowski in this New York Post photograph today. You can also see him in this very tabloid 2023 report in the New York Post. Quote, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem having absurdly blatant and public affair with handsy Trump aide Corey Lewandowski, sources say. Claims that Noem and Lewandowski in 2023 denied. In noting his presence at the All for the Cameras raid today in Arizona, the New York Post wrote, quote, also in the Bearcat with Noem was former Trump campaign manager and senior advisor Corey Lewandowski, who introduced himself to federal agents as chief of staff. The Department of Homeland Security later clarified that he is an advisor to the Department of Homeland Security. Oh, you're the chief of staff, are you? Chief of staff to what? To who? Kristi Noem also brought another friend, too, a notorious right-wing social media personality who got a badge for the day and everything. But Kristi Noem is not the only Trump administration official doing law enforcement cosplay. There's another one who's doing it in a way that may be a serious screw-up. Not just an embarrassment, but an actual big legal mistake, although I'm not sure they understand that yet. We'll try to explain simply next.
Promising a bunch of coal jobs and such. This was back in 2017 because Trump tried this stuff before. And it was interesting. They were saying coal mining jobs Trump would bring back no longer exist. Talking about coal, and it's any number of industries. A lot of them have been automated or we've found alternative and cleaner ways to do things. Essentially what it is that Trump, Musk, these whole party essentially want to roll things back and bring you back a world that doesn't exist anymore. I guess if you really want to sell this world to other people, hey, let's go back to the days of the robber barons and child labor and a bunch of factories with long hours, low pay. Or maybe you want to go further back, right? You want to go back to the days of the plantation. You can do that. I laugh. It's like, at this point, I feel like this Trump Musk should be selling time machines. I mean, because that's what these people want. Here's some more of them calling out. Check this out.
There is a trade. We already have a free trade agreement. We have a trade surplus. So getting the least bad, why did they get whacked in the first place?
We're addressing the $1.2 trillion deficit, the largest in human history that President Biden left us with. We should be running up the score in Australia.
Ambassador Clear, answer the question on Australia. We have a trade surplus with Australia. We have a free trade agreement. Why? They are an incredibly important national security partner. Why were they whacked with a tariff?
Senator, despite the agreement, they ban our beef, they ban our pork, they're getting ready to impose measures on our digital companies.
With your Greek letter formula, the fact that we have a trade surplus.
We have a global tariff on everyone. We're trying to address the $1.2 trillion deficit that Biden left us with.
I think that answer, sir, you're a much smarter person than that answer. The idea that we are going to whack friend and foe alike, and particularly friends, with this level is both, I think, insulting the Australians, undermines our national security, and frankly makes us not a good partner going forward. The lack of trust from friends and allies based upon this ridiculous policy that goes into full effect at midnight tonight is extraordinary.
After the inauguration, Donald Trump named somebody to be the acting U.S. attorney in the state of New Jersey. Then recently, and inexplicably, he changed his mind and swapped that person out and swapped in his personal lawyer, a woman named Alina Habba, who has zero experience as a prosecutor, but who did once have a good career representing parking garage companies and all their legal needs. So there's that. In her new capacity as acting U.S. attorney for the state of New Jersey, Ms. Habba has now got herself kitted out to do a ride-along with federal marshals a few days ago. She even got to escort people in handcuffs into vehicles and everything, all for the cameras. In her Instagram post about this adventure, she tagged another woman outfitted with Marshals gear who appears to be her executive assistant. So that ride-along with the Marshals turns out to have been real fun for the whole team. Here's something worth knowing about, though. Although this part of the law might never have come up in the whole parking garage lawyer part of her career, this riding along and play acting at arresting people with the U.S. Marshals could be more than just embarrassing. It could also be a big legal screw-up. Joining us now to explain is MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. Lisa, thanks very much for being here. You were trying to explain this to me offline, and I felt like you needed to explain it to me in front of everybody because it seems both important and relatively simple. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So effectively, by doing these ride-alongs, Alina Habba is making herself a witness to the arrest of these people who are being picked up by U.S. Marshals. Why is that potentially legally problematic?
So, Rachel, there's a clear ethical rule that one cannot simultaneously be an advocate and a witness to the same proceeding. And that differentiates someone like Alina Habba, who's a prosecutor, from folks perhaps like Kristi Noem or mayors who frequently go on ride-alongs. Ride-alongs are not themselves inherently a bad thing. But when someone from a prosecutor's office puts themselves in a position where they interact with someone who could become a criminal defendant, that could potentially taint any future prosecution because that person could become a witness, thereby thereby demanding that person's recusal, and not only that person's recusal, but potentially the recusal of that entire prosecutor's office. In this case, the United States Attorney's Office for the District of New Jersey.
So that's okay. So this is what seems amazing to me. So by doing this, again, specifically because she's the head prosecutor in the federal prosecutor's office for the state of New Jersey, she could potentially put herself in the position for any of those people who were arrested on that ride along. Not only where she personally might face demands for her recusal, but the entire office, which would mean that those people could not be federally prosecuted in New Jersey, right?
Or that they would have to be prosecuted by people brought in from Main Justice or another U.S. Attorney's Office. But yes, that is what 4 former senior law enforcement officials at the federal level told me last week.
Wow. MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, an invaluable part of the Rachel Maddow Show team at all times of day, but particularly valuable here tonight on air. Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be right back.
His mouth. It's like, are you kidding me? How can he be president of the United States? Yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu was at the White House. He had a press conference. And of the bizarro things that he said, I found this to be one of the most bizarre, like throwing a bone to the Nazis.
The stories they told me, I mean, as an example, I said to them, was there any sign of love? You were there, 10 people. It's only 10, but it's pretty representative. Did the Hamas show any signs of, like, help or liking you? Did they wink at you? Did they give you a piece of bread extra? Did they give you a meal on the side, like, you know, you think of doing, like what happened in Germany, what happened elsewhere? People would try and help people that were in unbelievable distress. They said no. I said all of them. I said, did they ever wink at you, like, you'll be okay, you're going to be okay? No, they didn't do that. They'd slap us. The hatred is unbelievable. And the lives, you know, they lived in a pipe, not really a tunnel, it was a pipe. And they always thought they were suffocating, they were going to suffocate. And then.
What is he talking about? Did they give you a piece of bread? Did they wink at you? Did they like you like they did in Germany? I mean, he's in front of Netanyahu, who we can argue whether he's a war criminal or not, but he is Jewish. And so he's acting like there were people that were nice to the Nazis in the Oval Office. He is so ignorant. It's unbelievable.
This whole thing is disgusting to me. Benjamin Netanyahu is disgusting, and all of these MAGA Christians that are so concerned about babies and kids don't have a problem with the tens of thousands of kids that are killed in Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu, this whole thing is disgusting to me. Benjamin Netanyahu is disgusting, and all of these MAGA Christians that are so concerned about babies and kids don't have a problem with the tens of thousands of kids that are killed in Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu is an absolute disgrace. Donald Trump is an absolute disgrace. That is the most disgusting Oval Office meeting I've seen. It even trumps that of Zelensky. That is
$1,000 or more of life insurance, you may qualify to sell your policy. Don't cancel or let your policy lapse without.
All right, that's going to do it for me for now. I will see you again tomorrow and every night this week here at 9 p.m. Eastern on MSNBC. Now it's time for the great Lawrence O'Donnell on The Last Word. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Rachel. We have some breaking news from the IRS. Associated Press reporting that the IRS acting commissioner is resigning over the demand that they send immigrants' tax data to ICE. It says Melanie Krause, who had served as acting head since February, will step down over the new data sharing document signed Monday by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. The agreement will allow ICE to submit names and addresses of immigrants inside the U.S. illegally to the IRS for cross-verification against tax records. And that is a new use of IRS data, which has always had a kind of confidential sanctity in the federal government.
Yeah, I think it's also, doesn't that make this the third director of the IRS since in less than 3 months since Trump has been sworn in? That's also very bad. I mean, Americans are all filing their taxes right now. Part of that is wanting to know that the IRS is competent and is going to treat us fairly, but it has always been the bargain with the U.S. government that we submit that information to the IRS specifically for the purpose of adjudicating our taxes and not for any other thing. And that's why people comply with tax law. This this is a fundamental break here.
And Rachel, you're so much sharper than I am off the top of your head. In my ear, it was just whispered to me by Melissa that yes, it's the third, which I did not know. So.
Yeah.
So
the first one going was bad. The second one going was really bad.
Yeah.
This one is a 5-alarm fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, here we are once again.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Lex.
Thank you. And so as we come to the end of day 2 of the Musk versus Trump war over tariffs, Donald Trump, think about this, Donald Trump will be trying to fall asleep tonight, wondering when Elon Musk might be publicly calling him a moron. Something I right here have to confess to having done myself in moments of rhetorical weakness when my imagination doesn't come up with something more elevated to use as an accurate description of Donald Trump. Donald Trump's chief trade advisor, Peter Navarro, will be trying to fall asleep tonight wondering if he will serve as many days in the second Trump administration as he served in federal prison for lying for Donald Trump. Peter Navarro, you might recall, tried to get away with the lie that he did not have to respond to a congressional subpoena from the January 6th committee because he was protected by executive privilege. That was a lie. And at his trial in federal court in Washington, D.C., that lie got him convicted of contempt of Congress and sentenced to federal prison, where he served 120 days. Peter Navarro was a private citizen when he was claiming an executive privilege that did not exist. Peter Navarro now needs 42 more days in the Trump administration to match his 120 days in prison. And right now, Elon Musk is saying everything he can publicly say to get Peter Navarro fired immediately. Every day of Peter Navarro's life is now worse than the day before. Yesterday, Elon Musk's criticism of Peter Navarro was muted compared to today, when Musk's opening line of attack against Donald Trump's chief trade advisor was, "Navarro is truly a moron." When Donald Trump read that, even Donald Trump is capable of seeing how easily the name Trump could be substituted for the name Navarro in that tweet. And if Peter Navarro is truly a moron, what do you call the person who follows Peter Navarro's advice? Donald Trump has called Elon Musk a genius, and now, according to the Trump formulation, a genius has called Donald Trump's chief trade advisor a moron, and Donald Trump has chosen the side of the accused moron over the Trump-proclaimed genius. So what does that make Donald Trump? There is only one president of the United States in history who would take Peter Navarro's advice on anything. There's only one president of any country in the world today who would take Peter Navarro's advice on anything. And Donald Trump's personal genius has called Peter Navarro a moron. Even Donald Trump can figure out how Elon Musk really feels about someone who would take a moron's advice. It got worse for Peter Navarro as Elon Musk and his brother Kimball Musk, a member of the board of Tesla, joined in double-team Twitter attacks of Peter Navarro as the day wore on that included nastier words than moron that I cannot say on this program. Yesterday, Elon Musk's brother, Kimball Musk, directly attacked Donald Trump, saying, as I reported here last night, who would have thought that Trump was actually the most high-tax American president in generations? Through his tariff strategy, Trump has implemented a structural permanent tax on the American consumer. Elon Musk's brother is a wholly owned subsidiary of Elon Musk, and as a board member of Tesla, can be fairly assumed to never say a word publicly that Elon Musk doesn't approve of. And so tonight, Donald Trump is just one Musk away from being directly attacked by the richest person in the world for creating the biggest tax increase in American history all by himself. And so, as Donald Trump rests his weary head on his pillow tonight, with his hair in whatever protective device he uses for sleeping, he has to wonder, when will Elon Musk turn on me? Donald Trump knows Elon Musk is not a patient person. Elon Musk has personally lost more money to the Trump tariffs than any other person in the world. In the first hour of the stock market's opening today, another day when Elon Musk lost more money, Elon Musk tweeted, "Navarro is dumber than a sack of bricks." And then, during the afternoon session when the stock market was sinking badly and Elon Musk was losing even more money once again today, Elon Musk tweeted, "I'd like to apologize to Bricks for calling Peter Navarro dumber than a sack of bricks. That was so unfair to Bricks." To which Kimball Musk immediately jumped in with, "A moment of silence, please, for all the bricks that have been unfairly maligned when being compared to Navarro." So, if Peter Navarro is dumber than a sack of bricks, that makes Donald Trump dumber than a sack of what exactly, according to Elon Musk? We might be days or weeks away from finding out how Elon Musk will publicly complete the sentence, "Donald Trump is dumber than a sack of blank." And so Donald Trump is desperately worried tonight. He is desperately worried about the crashing stock market, which has lost $6 trillion in value, thanks entirely and exclusively to Donald Trump, following the advice of a person called a moron by a person Donald Trump describes as a genius. And now Donald Trump is worried that the person he thinks is a genius is going to be calling him a moron any day now. And Donald Trump is worried that he will then lose access to the unlimited amount of political money the richest person in the world has been willing to give Donald Trump and willing to use in Republican politics to threaten Republicans to stay in line with Donald Trump. Elon Musk's money is the single most important new element in Donald Trump's ability to continue to hold on to Republicans' public loyalty. But that Republican loyalty is beginning to crumble thanks to Donald Trump following the advice of Peter Navarro. We all know just how cowardly every single Republican member of Congress is when it comes to anything involving Donald Trump. And so it is a hugely significant crack in the wall of Trump Republican loyalty tonight that the most senior Republican member of the Senate, Chuck Grassley, who has never been in favor of presidentially imposed tariffs before Donald Trump was elected, has introduced a bill with a total of 7 Republican co-sponsors to limit the president's ability to raise tariffs without Congress's approval. So that's 7 Republicans willing to go public against Donald Trump on tariffs, and 4 more Republicans emerged today in the Senate Finance Committee, which has jurisdiction over tariffs, taking shots at Donald Trump's tariffs during a hearing with the person who is supposed to be the president's chief international trade advisor, United States Trade Representative, Jamieson Greer. Here is a sample, just a sample, of what Republican senators were brave enough to say today about the Trump tariffs.
If the purpose is to stall on negotiations in order to keep tariffs high for the sole purpose of feeding the U.S. Treasury, I oppose that.
Who pays these high tariffs? In the short, medium term, it will be the consumer. It'll be the consumer.